Some neighbors are just a little annoying, but the Karen sisters who lived next door to me weren't just annoying. They were entitled monsters. They thought the entire neighborhood revolved around them. Every HOA meeting, they acted like queens of the block, deciding who should cut their grass, who was parking wrong, and even who could decorate their houses during holidays. But their worst obsession was my swimming pool. I worked hard for that pool. It was my personal escape after long workdays, my little piece of peace. Yet, to the Karen sisters, it was like community property. They constantly complained at meetings that I was being selfish for not letting other neighbors use it. They even told me once that the HOA should take control of it because children deserve access at first. I laughed it off, but things got ugly. One afternoon, I came home early and caught both sisters lounging in my pool chairs like they owned the place. Their shoes and bags were tossed on my deck, and their kids were splashing in the deep end. I was furious, but they just waved at me, saying, "Relax. It's just water." I told them to leave immediately, but they smirked and acted like I was the problem. That's when I realized talking wouldn't work. If they wanted to trespass, they were about to get the shock of their lives. And believe me, what I set up wasn't illegal. It was just the perfect way to make sure they'd never dare step foot on my property again. What happened next turned into the most dramatic neighborhood showdown our HOA had ever seen. Summer had barely started when I realized the Karen sisters were going to make my life miserable. Living in a neighborhood with an HOA already came with its fair share of headaches: rules about what color your mailbox could be painted, how many inches your grass was allowed to grow, and even how long you could leave your trash cans out after collection day. But compared to the constant drama of the Karen sisters, those rules felt like small inconveniences. The sisters lived 2 houses down, and they carried themselves like royalty, presiding over a kingdom they had no real claim to. The first time they ever mentioned my pool was during an HOA meeting. I had just poured myself a lukewarm cup of coffee from the communal table when I heard one of them, Karen number 1, the older sister with a tight bun and permanently pinched lips, raise her voice. "I just think it's unfair," she announced to the room. "Some people in this community have resources that others don't, like that pool of his." Every eye turned toward me. My stomach tightened, though I tried to act casual. "Excuse me," I asked. "You heard me," she said, folding her arms. "You've got that giant pool just sitting there all summer. Meanwhile, there are kids in this neighborhood who don't have anywhere to swim. It's selfish to hog it for yourself." Her younger sister, Karen number 2, chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Honestly, it should be considered a community asset. That's what the HOA is for, sharing resources fairly. Children deserve to have fun, not be excluded by one person who thinks he's better than everyone else." A ripple of murmurs went around the room. Some neighbors just shook their heads, others whispered. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You think my private pool on my private property, that I paid for with my own money, should be community property?" The sisters exchanged a smug look. "Exactly," the older one said. "It's the neighborly thing to do." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You can't be serious." But they were. Dead serious. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks they started dropping little comments every time they saw me outside. If I was skimming leaves out of the pool, one of them would stroll by and say something like, "Such a waste, all that water for one person." If I had friends over, they'd mutter about how exclusive I was being. It became clear they wanted access, and they weren't going to stop until they got it. At first I ignored them. You can't reason with people like that, and I figured if I didn't engage, they'd get bored. But one afternoon, I came home earlier than usual. I had left work halfway through the day because of a pounding headache, just wanting to lie down. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something strange: splashes of water glinting in the sunlight, faint echoes of laughter floating over the fence. My heart sank. I pushed open the side gate to my backyard, and there they were, the Karen sisters, stretched out on my pool chairs like they were on vacation, sunglasses perched on their noses, tall glasses of lemonade in their hands. Their kids were cannonballing into the deep end, screaming with laughter, soaking everything in sight. My towels were draped across the chairs. My cooler had been opened. They'd made themselves at home. I froze, too stunned to speak. The younger sister noticed me first. She raised her glass in a mock toast. "Oh hey, you're home early." The kids were dying to swim, so we thought we'd give them a little fun. "You thought you'd..." My voice cracked with anger. "This is my pool, my property. What are you doing here?" The older sister rolled her eyes as if I were the unreasonable one. "Don't be so uptight. It's just water. You weren't even using it." Something inside me snapped. "Get out now." Their smiles faltered. The kids stopped splashing. "Excuse me," the older sister said. "You heard me. Get out." They exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Then the younger one sighed dramatically as though I had ruined her day. "Fine," she said, gathering her things at an agonizingly slow pace. Her sister muttered something under her breath about how selfish people ruin communities. The kids whined about leaving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they shuffled out the gate, dripping water all over the deck. I locked the gate behind them, my hands shaking with rage. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Trespassing was one thing, But the smugness, the way they acted like I was the intruder, made my blood boil that night. I lay awake in bed replaying the scene over and over. Their words echoed in my mind. It's just water, community asset, selfish. I had worked hard for that pool. It wasn't some luxury handed to me. It was the result of long hours, tight budgets, and years of saving. To have them waltz in and act entitled to a tit felt like theft. The next morning, I walked out to the pool deck and sat in one of the damp chairs they'd used. I stared at the rippling water, still unsettled. That's when the thought hit me. They weren't going to stop. They were bold enough to sneak into my yard in broad daylight. What would stop them from doing it again while I was at work? Or worse, what if they damaged something? Or their kids got hurt? Who would they blame? I realized then I couldn't rely on the HOA. They had already dismissed my complaints. In the past, as neighborly disputes, the sisters were too loud, too pushy, too practiced at twisting the narrative. If I wanted peace, I'd have to create it myself. The plan started forming in my mind almost immediately. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. About making sure they thought twice before ever stepping foot on my property again. A slow smile spread across my face as the idea solidified. They wanted my pool. Fine, I'd give them a pool experience they'd never forget. And that's when I decided, the next time those Karen sisters trespassed, they'd get a shock so unforgettable it would ripple through the entire neighborhood. The very next day I drove straight to the hardware store with a clear mission in mind. Walking down the aisles of hoses, timers, and garden gadgets, I felt like a man preparing for battle. My weapon of choice, a motion-activated sprinkler system. Originally the design was simple. It was meant to keep raccoons, deer, or stray cats away from gardens. But in my case, it was going to defend something far more valuable in my peace. I loaded the boxes into my cart, feeling the kind of satisfaction that comes only when you know you're about to outsmart someone who thinks they're smarter than you. At the checkout, the cashier gave me a polite smile and said, "Looks like you've got a critter problem." I chuckled to myself. Something like that. When I got home, I spent the entire afternoon setting everything up. I positioned one sprinkler on the deck by the lounge chairs, another facing the shallow end of the pool, and a third right near the gate entrance. I even adjusted the sensitivity so the smallest motion would set them off. Testing them gave me a wicked sense of joy. The instant I stepped on the deck, a jet of icy water blasted across the boards, soaking me through in seconds. If I was caught off guard, I knew the sisters would be. By the time the sun went down, the system was ready. I sat on my porch with a beer in hand, staring at the pool, imagining their shrieks when the trap was sprung. But to make sure the plan worked perfectly, I had to catch them in the act. Evidence was everything, especially with people like the Karen sisters. So, the next morning, I installed a discreet camera on the porch, angled directly at the pool. If the sisters decided to pull another stunt, I'd have both a humiliating show and the proof to shove in the HOA's face. For the next 2 days, I waited. Every time I left the house, I felt anxious, half expecting to come back to damp footprints across my deck or chairs out of place. But strangely, there was no sign of them. I wondered if maybe the confrontation had scared them off. A part of me hoped it had, but a larger part knew better. People like the Karen sisters didn't just give up. On the third day, I decided to test my theory. Instead of going to work, I parked my car around the corner and walked back quietly through a side street, hiding behind the neighbor's hedge where I had a clear view of my backyard. It was a ridiculous thing to do, but my gut told me something was about to happen. Sure enough, an hour later, the gate latch rattled. The younger sister pushed it open, her sunglasses perched proudly on her head like a crown. Behind her, the older one strutted in with a beach bag slung over her shoulder. They looked like they were stepping into a resort. Their kids trailed behind, already bouncing with excitement, towels dragging along the grass. I crouched lower behind the hedge, my heart pounding. They didn't even hesitate this time. The older sister kicked off her sandals and flopped onto one of my lounge chairs with a satisfied sigh. "Finally, somewhere decent to relax," she said, unzipping the bag and pulling out snacks. Her younger sister dipped her toes into the water, then smiled smugly. "Can you believe he still hasn't opened this up to the neighborhood? Honestly, what a selfish jerk." The kids whooped and jumped straight into the pool, splashing each other. Their laughter echoed through the yard, carefree and oblivious. I clenched my fists, waiting. Just a few more steps. "Come on." The younger Karen got up and wandered over to the other chair. The moment her foot crossed the center, a powerful jet of icy water blasted her square in the chest, soaking her blouse instantly. She let out a shriek that pierced the air, stumbling backward as the sprinkler followed her like a predator, drenching her from head to toe. "What the?" she screamed, shielding her face. Before the older sister could react, the second sprinkler near the lounge chair triggered, spraying her with equal force. She leapt up, dropping her bag of snacks, crackers and chips scattering across the wet deck. Her sunglasses flew off as she screamed, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" The kids stopped swimming. Then the third sprinkler by the gate activated, trapping them in a triangle of water streams. No matter where they ran, another jet blasted them. They slipped, slid, and flailed helplessly as their shrieks filled the air. I covered my mouth, trying not to laugh out loud from my hiding spot. It was better than I imagined. After several chaotic minutes of screaming and scrambling, the sisters finally bolted for the gate, dragging their drenched children with them. Their clothes clung to their bodies, their hair plastered to their faces. They looked less like queens of the HOA and more like drowned rats. When the gate slammed behind them, silence returned. The pool water rippled gently, the deck glistened, and my camera had caught every glorious second that night. I replayed the footage on my laptop at least 10 times, laughing until my sides hurt. It was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. But I knew the sisters wouldn't take it quietly. They never did. Sure enough, the very next day I heard furious knocking at my door. I opened it to find both sisters standing there, arms crossed, hair still a little frizzy from the soaking. "You assaulted us," the older one barked. "With what water?" I asked, smirking. "Don't play dumb," the younger one snapped. "Those sprinklers were clearly designed to target us. You can't just set up traps on your property like some kind of psycho. We're reporting this to the H. Be my guest," I said calmly. "But you might want to think twice before you admit to trespassing, because I've got the whole thing on video." Their smugness faltered for the first time. The younger one's mouth opened, then closed. The older one flushed red. "You'll regret this," she stammered. Then they turned on their heels and stormed off down the walkway. I leaned against the doorframe, smiling. Let them try. The footage wasn't just my protection, it was my revenge. And deep down, I knew the HOA meeting that followed was going to be one for the history books. The HOA meeting was scheduled for that Thursday evening, and I knew exactly how things would go. The Karen sisters would storm in with their righteous fury, accusing me of all sorts of nonsense, and I'd be the villain in their little drama. They were masters at twisting words and gathering sympathy. But this time I wasn't walking in defenseless. I had my laptop tucked under my arm and the video queued up, ready to play. When I walked into the community clubhouse, the room was already buzzing. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, sipping coffee from styrofoam cups, murmuring to one another. At the front of the room sat the HOA president, a tired-looking man named Greg who had the permanent demeanor of someone who regretted ever volunteering for the role, and of course the Karen sisters were there. They stood near the front row, arms crossed, scowls plastered on their faces. The older one shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. The younger one whispered something in her ear, and they both gave me identical smirks. It was obvious they thought they were about to win. The meeting started with the usual nonsense: budget updates, landscaping issues, someone complaining about teenagers skateboarding near the mailboxes. I barely listened. My pulse thumped in my ears, waiting for the inevitable. And then it came. The older Karen shot her hand into the air. "I have a very serious matter to bring up," she announced loudly, making sure every head turned. Greg sighed. "Yes, Karen." She stood, her voice dripping with self-importance. "My sister and I were recently the victims of harassment and assault, right here in this community." She gestured dramatically toward me. By him, a ripple of whispers spread across the room. My neighbors glanced between us, some raising eyebrows, others frowning. "Assault?" Greg asked cautiously. "Yes," the younger sister said, springing up. "He deliberately set up dangerous sprinklers like traps to target us and our children. We were drenched head to toe, humiliated, and left in a dangerous situation. It's unacceptable behavior in a family neighborhood. We demand that the HOA fine him, and if necessary, restrict his ability to maintain such hostile equipment." Murmurs of agreement floated around. A few people nodded, clearly swayed by their performance. My hands tightened around my laptop. I stood slowly. "May I respond?" Greg nodded, relief washing over his face. He hated confrontation. "First of all," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "these so-called traps are motion-activated sprinklers. They're sold at any hardware store to keep pests away. Perfectly legal, perfectly safe. And secondly, the only reason the sisters set them off is because they were trespassing on my property." Gasps, more whispers. The sisters both scoffed loudly. "That's a lie," the older one snapped. "We were simply passing through, really." I interrupted, "because I have the whole thing on video." That shut the room up. I opened my laptop, clicked play, and turned the screen so the room could see. The footage was glorious. The sisters strutted into my yard like they owned the place, dumped their bags on my chairs, and let their kids dive into the pool. Then came the sprinklers, jets of water blasting them from all directions, their shrieks filling the speakers. Laughter rippled through the room as the sisters flailed, slipping and sliding like characters in a slapstick comedy. By the time the video ended, the room was practically buzzing with stifled chuckles. A few people even clapped. My heart raced as I closed the laptop. So, as you can see, they weren't passing through. They were trespassing on my private property. And if anyone here doubts that, you're welcome to check the property lines with the county records. Greg leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Well, I think that settles that." The sisters were red-faced, sputtering. "This is outrageous," the younger one shrieked. "You can't just humiliate us like this." "You humiliated yourselves," I said calmly. Greg raised a hand. "Enough. It's clear the sprinklers were within his rights, and the video speaks for itself. The real issue is trespassing. That's against the HOA code, not to mention the law. Consider this your official warning. If it happens again, we'll be forced to escalate it to law enforcement." The sisters froze. The room fell silent. For once, they had no comeback. Their mouths opened and closed like fish gasping for air, but no words came out. The rest of the meeting moved on, but I barely heard it. Adrenaline coursed through me. For the first time, the sisters hadn't gotten their way. For the first time, the neighborhood saw them for what they were. Entitled, arrogant bullies. When the meeting adjourned, neighbors I barely knew came up to me, grinning. "That was priceless," one man said. "I haven't laughed that hard in months." Another neighbor, an older woman who always kept to herself, patted my arm. "Good for you." Someone needed to put them in their place. Their support meant more than I expected. For so long I'd felt isolated by the sisters' constant scheming, like maybe I was overreacting. But the video had changed everything. Now, the truth was undeniable. As I packed up my laptop, I caught sight of the sisters huddled in the corner, whispering furiously. Their faces were twisted with anger, their pride shredded. When they finally stormed out, they didn't look at me, but I could feel the venom radiating off them. Walking back to my house, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Victory tasted sweet. Still, a nagging thought lingered at the back of my mind. People like the Karen sisters didn't give up easily. They'd been embarrassed, yes, but humiliation had a way of fueling revenge. Sure enough, later that night, as I sat on my porch enjoying the cool breeze, I saw them walk past my house. They didn't say a word, but they stared long burning glares that promised they weren't finished. I took a sip of my drink and stared back, unflinching. For now, the score was in my favor, but I knew this was only round one of a longer fight. The sisters weren't just going to slink away quietly, and deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were already plotting their next move. The days following the HOA meeting was strangely quiet. Too quiet. The Karen sisters, usually loud and impossible to ignore, kept their distance. They didn't march up to my door, didn't hurl passive-aggressive comments when I took the trash out, didn't even glare as much when we crossed paths on the sidewalk. At first, I wondered if maybe the humiliation had done the trick. Perhaps the video had finally silenced them for good. But people like the Karen sisters don't just fade away. They regroup, they wait, and they plot. The first sign of their retaliation came one Saturday morning. I walked out to check the mail and found a bright yellow notice taped to my door. Violation of HOA guidelines. It read in bold letters. My stomach sank as I skimmed the accusations. Improper fencing height. Unsightly pool equipment. Failure to maintain the yard according to community standards. I laughed bitterly. My yard was one of the neatest on the block. My fence had been approved when it was built, and my pool pump, hidden behind a screen just like the rules required. This wasn't about violations, it was about payback. Over the next week, more notices arrived. One claimed I was parking my car too close to the sidewalk. Another accused me of excessive noise late at night. Each notice came with a fine, and each fine grew larger. I knew exactly who was behind it. The Karen sisters had friends on the HOA board, and they were using them like weapons. At first, I tried to fight back by sending emails, attaching photos, proving my compliance. But the responses were vague, dismissive, or ignored entirely. It was like shouting into a void. The fines kept coming, and worse, the sisters had started whispering rumors around the neighborhood at the grocery store. I overheard two women muttering near the produce section. "Did you hear about him? Apparently, he threatened the kids." "Terrible," the other whispered. "Always knew there was something off about him." I clenched my teeth, pushing my cart away before they noticed me. My blood boiled. Threatened kids. That was the sisters' lie, obviously spun from the sprinkler incident. They were turning me into the villain. The final straw came one humid evening when I returned home to find a note shoved into my mailbox. No envelope, no signature, just messy handwriting on lined paper. "You don't belong here. Sell your house and leave before things get worse." I sat on my porch with the note crumpled in my fist, rage simmering in my chest. This wasn't just petty anymore, it was war. They wanted me out of the neighborhood, humiliated, defeated, and if I didn't push back, they'd get exactly what they wanted. That night, I stayed up late, replaying everything in my head. The trespassing, the sprinklers, the meeting, the fines, the rumors, the threat, each memory piled on top of the last, until I could barely sit still. And then the solution hit me. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one, but not with shouting or threats. No, I'd use the one thing that had worked before: evidence. The next morning I set up 2 more cameras. One faced the front yard, catching anyone who came near my mailbox or driveway. The other covered the side gate, the same one the sisters had used to sneak into my pool before. I positioned them carefully, hidden among the bushes, and tested the feeds on my phone. Crystal clear. It didn't take long for the cameras to pay off. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed with a motion alert at 1:14 a.m. I groggily opened the app and my jaw dropped. The younger Karen stood at my gate, flashlight in hand, clipboard tucked under her arm. She peered over the fence, scribbled something, then snapped a photo of my pool equipment. A few minutes later, the older sister joined her. They whispered to each other, pointing at random things in my yard, writing furiously. Then, unbelievably, they shoved a piece of paper into my mailbox and scurried away into the dark. I sat there in bed, heart hammering. I had them. Proof that they weren't just neighbors, they were stalkers, prowling around in the middle of the night, manufacturing violations the next morning. Sure enough, I found another notice in my mailbox. This one claimed my pool lights were creating light pollution in violation of HOA standards. I laughed out loud, holding the paper up to the camera like a prize. I spent the rest of the day editing the footage into a neat little package. First, their midnight visit, then, the close-up of their flashlight beams sweeping across my yard. Finally, the moment they stuffed the fake notice into my mailbox. It was undeniable. They weren't enforcing rules, they were harassing me. By the time the next HOA board meeting rolled around, I was ready. The sisters walked into the room as if nothing had happened, their usual smug expressions plastered on their faces. But when Greg called for new business, I raised my hand. I'd like to share something. I set my laptop on the table again, pressed play, and let the video speak for itself. Gasps filled the room. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide as the sisters appeared on screen, skulking around with flashlights like burglars. By the time the clip ended, the room was dead silent. I folded my arms. This is harassment. I've received multiple bogus violations that conveniently match what you see them doing. Here, snooping, inventing problems, and leaving fake notices. And if this board doesn't act, I'll be taking it to the police. Greg looked exhausted but firm. This is serious. Karen, he gestured to the sisters, who sat frozen in their chairs. You've crossed the line. If this continues, you'll face legal consequences, not just HOA penalties. The sisters sputtered, tried to spin excuses, but no one was listening anymore. The tide had turned. Neighbors were fed up, and I could see it in their eyes. For the first time, the sisters weren't feared or followed. They were mocked, exposed, and cornered. As the meeting ended, I caught their glare across the room. Their eyes burned with hatred, but beneath it I saw something else. Fear. They knew their power was slipping. Walking home, I felt a rush of satisfaction. They had tried to drown me in fines, lies, and intimidation, but I dragged them into the light. Still, I couldn't let my guard down, because people like the Karen sisters don't stop when they lose ground. They double down, and deep inside, I knew their next move would be the boldest yet. The following week felt like the calm before a storm. After the HOA meeting where I exposed the sisters sneaking around my property at night, the entire neighborhood buzzed with gossip. People whispered about the midnight prowlers, some even laughing openly when the sisters passed by. Their reputation was crumbling, and I knew they felt it. But humiliation doesn't always stop people like them. It drives them to desperation. On Friday evening, I was relaxing by the pool, headphones in, when I heard the faintest creak of the gate. My stomach tightened. Slowly I slid off the chair, pausing my music. The sound of muffled voices drifted across the yard. The sisters. I crouched low, my heart pounding as I peered around the hedge. There they were, dressed in dark clothes, carrying a large black trash bag and something that looked like spray paint. My gut twisted. They weren't here to swim. They were here to vandalize the cell. Teach him, the older one hissed. Yeah, the younger muttered. Nobody embarrasses us and gets away with it. I clenched my fists, fury rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. Instead of jumping out, I slipped my phone from my pocket and pressed record. The sisters crept to the pool deck. The older one pulled out the spray can and started shaking it. The younger began pulling random junk from the begratin food, old newspapers, even what looked like a bag of yard clippings. They were about to trash my backyard and tag my fence. But before they could start, I hit a button on my phone. Instantly, the motion sensors I'd upgraded earlier in the week kicked on. Floodlights blazed to life, bathing the yard in blinding white. A loud alarm shrieked through the speakers I had hidden under the eaves, sharp enough to wake the entire neighborhood. The sisters froze like deer in headlights. What is that? The younger one yelped, dropping the trash bag. Rotten food spilled across the deck, the stench rising. Run. The older shrieked, but it was too late. My cameras captured everything: their faces, the spray paint, the garbage. And this time, neighbors stepped outside, drawn by the alarm. Porch lights blinked on all around us. One by one, people came out, staring across fences and yards. What's going on? Someone called. Look. Another shouted. It's the Karens again. The sisters bolted toward the gate, but in their panic, the younger tripped over the sprinkler hose. She went sprawling across the wet grass with a scream, the spray paint can clattering to the ground. Her sister tried to help her up, but the sprinkler system activated, blasting them both with icy water. They shrieked and flailed, soaked from head to toe, slipping in the mud as neighbors laughed from their porches. I finally stepped out from behind the hedge, phone in hand. Smiley on camera again. The older Karen's face twisted in rage. You set us up, she screeched. You set yourselves up, I shot back, holding up the phone, caught red-handed. Vandalism, trespassing, harassment, you name it. I think the police are going to love this footage." The younger one scrambled to her feet, dripping and furious. "You'll regret this," she spat, but her words carried no weight anymore. Not with half the neighborhood watching. Not with the evidence recorded in crystal clear HD. By the time the police arrived, called by one of my neighbors who'd seen the chaos, the sisters were standing outside the gate, shivering and defeated. I calmly showed the officers the video, explained the pattern of harassment, and handed over the memory card. The sisters tried to spin a story about me being obsessive and trapping them, but the officers weren't buying it. In fact, one officer turned to them and said flatly, "You're lucky, all he's doing is filing charges. You could be spending the night in a cell." That night, as the flashing red and blue lights faded down the street, I sat by my pool in silence. The sisters were gonna escort it to their home, where they would be facing criminal charges and an HOA investigation. The neighborhood, once divided, was now united in relief. For years, everyone had tolerated their bullying, their gossip, their entitlement. But now, with evidence stacked against them, their reign was finished. Over the following weeks, the HOA board moved swiftly. The sisters were fined heavily, stripped of their board privileges, and warned that one more incident would result in formal eviction proceedings. Rumor had it their own family was urging them to sell the house and move before things got worse. And though they still tried to shoot me glares whenever we crossed paths, the fire in their eyes was gone. For the first time in months, I felt free. My pool was mine again. My yard was peaceful. The whispers in the grocery store turned into nods of respect, even quiet thank yous. I hadn't just defended myself, I defended the entire neighborhood. Sometimes, victory doesn't come from yelling louder or sinking to someone else's level. Sometimes, it comes from shining a bright light on the truth, letting the evidence speak, and standing your ground. As I floated in my pool one golden evening, the water calm and clear, I realized the Karen sisters had given me an unexpected gift, proof that even the loudest bullies can be silenced with patience, planning, and a little creativity. And this time, there would be no coming back for them.